I refused to take down a picture containing my trans son's Deadname story. I, 42F, have a son, Ben 19M, with my husband Tom. Ben was born as a girl and realized by 16 that he wanted to transition and go from FTM. Me and Tom weren't initially supportive, and I took longer to come around, and only did so after Tom passed in an accident, and I realized how distant my relationship with Ben was. When Ben was born, Tom got a tattoo of our then daughter's name on his arm, and we have a lovely picture together of me, Tom, and Ben, at a few months old, at the beach, where Tom's tattoo is visible. Ben doesn't like me to keep pictures of his past when he was a kid or older and still female, so I only have pictures out in the house of him as a toddler or an adult now. The only picture that I have not agreed to take down is the one of us at the beach. I really like that one, and Ben's only issue is the tattoo, but for me, it's one of my happiest memories that day, and I don't want to take it down. Ben is very upset about me keeping that picture up and says I'm being cruel, as it reminds him of his dead name. Tom passed when Ben was still female presenting, so the only photo I have of us three that Ben likes, well, used to like, is the one at the beach, where Ben is a lot younger and wearing a gender-neutral outfit. Also, the photo is up in the hallway portion just outside my bedroom, which is not anywhere near Ben's room and will not be seen by house guests unless they come into my room. Response 1, probably controversial, but not the a-hole. This is a picture of your family at one of its happiest moments. Your husband is deceased, and that picture reminds you of happier times. You have rid the house of all other pictures of your son, except this one. Time for Ben to compromise. Reply 1. Honestly, it sounds like Ben needs some major therapy if he can't even have pictures of the past, including his dead dad. Reply 2. A deceased father that Ben was on bad terms with when he passed. Losing that hope of future reconciliation will also mess a person up. Reply 3. Where do you get that he was on bad terms when he passed? OP says that both she and Tom were initially unsupportive, but that it was her, not Tom, who took longer to come around, and that she didn't until after Tom died and realized she was distant from Ben. That tells me that Tom had come around before his death. Reply 4. The time before, when someone openly transitions, can be some of the most traumatic, stressful, harmful, and painful of their lives. Not only do they have this struggle about who or what they are, how they feel, and the terror of what reactions will be to their transition, and the current state of affairs in regard to the topic of transgender individuals, and especially transgender kids, teens, but they also have the fallout, whatever that may be, of their coming out. My nibbling, non-binary child of my sibling, a gender-neutral alternative to niece or nephew, socially transitioned when they were 15-16 after coming out to the immediate family when they were 13-14. They started by going under a different name, which is now their legal name, as my sis and brother-in-law paid for their name change for their 16th birthday when they had been going by that name for approximately 2/3 years, and requested their pronouns be they, them. Every day since their transition, they have received discrimination, verbal and psychological abuse, and death RPE threats. They were dead-named in the hallway at school and told they were perverted, disgusting, brainwashed, should just go and unalive themselves, or that they don't exist and are their birth gender, a freak and attention-seeking. They were pushed to breaking point with the stress and trauma they experienced and became exceptionally depressed and suicidal. They are one of the strongest, bravest people I have ever had the privilege of knowing, and they have been through a hell of a lot in their few short years on this earth. So I want to emphasize that to get them to this point took a lot. When they're finally out and can start to be their authentic selves, it can, even with all of the above going on daily, be incredibly freeing, and they see it as their birth. Everything before is tainted by this huge secret or uncertainty, and the idea that the person in the photos isn't who they are, or even who they were, because they were hiding inside this shell that they were born into and forced to keep on by the attitudes of others, society as a whole. In a way, it's as if you are putting up a photo of your late husband and some random child. Another similar example could be when adult children finally find the courage to tell a parent that the other parent abused them, usually after the abuser's passing when they feel it's finally safe to do so. Old family photos can be a reminder of those traumatic events, even if the memory depicted is a positive one for all involved. Perhaps there is a compromise available? How prominent is the tattoo in the photo? Is it possible that you can get some passport photos done with Ben and slot them in the frame to cover the tattoo? How would Ben feel about this as a compromise? If that isn't possible, would moving that particular photo to your bedroom be an acceptable compromise? That way, you get to keep the photo as is, and Ben doesn't have to see it and relive that traumatic period every time. I'm sure there is a workaround that will please both of you. You just need to talk it through and be willing to compromise. Response 2. Usually, when I see the title of posts like this, I immediately feel that the OP would be the a-hole, but after reading through, I need to say, not the a-hole. It could very well be that the pain of the initial rejection of transition is what's motivating the anger of OP child and the trauma of losing their father. Keeping that one photo up that was a precious memory is allowed, especially if OP is finally taking accountability and is finally taking the responsibility to make adjustments to suit their son, removing a majority of photos, etc. I'll never pretend to understand what a trans person experiences, especially in the vulnerable stages of the initial transitioning and the need for support, acceptance, validation. And in the same breath, I can't put myself in the shoes of a parent who is experiencing their child changing before their eyes. I feel like both sides of the coin come with a lot of grief, mourning, confusion, and a whole range of emotions that are best explored in a safe space, such as a therapist who has experience with trans people. Bottom line, I feel OP is allowed to keep that one photo, but until both them and their son work through their grief and come to an understanding, a compromise may be wise where said photo is kept in OP's bedroom and not in shared living areas of the house. Reply 1. I don't understand the whole trans experience either, honestly. My ex-husband was FTM. He was also an abusive douche canoe, but that is another story entirely. He will be the first person to tell you he loves his late mother. She was so insanely important to him, and he gushed about her all the time, talking about how she was the best mom in the universe, until he talks about his past. He will still gush, but he will also describe his past in terms that make it sound like his mother was a crazy bitch who forced her little boy to conform to female stereotypes, and forced a boy to do girl things and wear dresses with full knowledge. It was a little boy. She was cross-dressing. The reality is, my ex didn't realize he was trans till he was an adult and well after his mother had passed. And when strangers make a comment about how abusive his mom was, he'd get super pissed at them, and I would hold my tongue because he just would not get that he was making her sound that way. I feel like in pursuing his male identity, he chose to aggressively deny he understood the complexity of female life. He ended up acting worse than a 1950s husband. He was so averse to doing things for me that dealt with my femininity that my father started to hate the bad name he was giving guys. And when I finally broke and said I wanted a divorce, my dad produced the paperwork ready to go. I got trapped on my period in the bathroom with no pads. My ex-husband was playing video games the whole time because he told me not only would he not go get me some pads, but he would not go with me when I got them. So I called my dad and asked him to pick some up when he got off work in 5 hours. After he pressed for more info, because why can't X do it? My father got up, told his boss he had to save his kid, clocked out, and went and got them immediately. My dad finally told my ex-husband if he wanted to be treated like a man, to start acting like one when I hurt my back pretty badly. It was actually a broken tailbone, but we the doctors didn't find it till it was too late to fix. And I asked my ex-husband to hold my bag a moment so I could get out of the car. It was low to the ground. And he yelled at me, "Men don't carry purses." We were going out to dinner with my parents, so he did that in front of my dad, who walked over and pushed him out of his way. He took the bag from me and held his arm out to give me extra support standing up. Spent the whole dinner when I asked for help, essentially shoving my ex out of the way to do it himself. He was that pissed at him. No one was treating him like a woman, and no one even realized he was trans until he told people, so acting like a sexist dick was doing nothing for him. Even the other trans folks I am friends with were confused by his actions when we talked about it. I just don't understand this idea of completely denying your past existed or an aspect of what made you, you. And sure, I never had my gender identity denied, but that doesn't mean I haven't had other aspects of my identity just as immutable denied. Response 3, no a-holes here. He's allowed to not like it, and you're allowed to like it. Consider that it may be a reminder that his father was not supportive of his gender and that he did not feel safe transitioning while his father was alive. His father never got to see him truly being himself. That's pretty painful. To not have any photos of himself and his dad that aren't painful. That all your happiest memories will of course be of when your husband was still alive and are of times when he was suffering. Can you take the photo to a photo restoration expert and see about getting a version made where the tattoo is removed? It's not difficult to do and does no damage to the original, which you can still keep while hanging a restored version. Or, AITA, cut a piece of Post-it note over the tattoo so you can keep the photo, but Ben doesn't have to look at his dead name when he looks at it? Can you do something to help strengthen Ben's connection to and memory of his father in different ways? I imagine there's a lot of complicated feelings there. Reply 1. Okay, but the issue here isn't that the son doesn't like something, it's that he wants her to also not like it and get rid of it. I think it's fair of him to ask that it be kept private in OP's bedroom, but that's not what he wants. He wants his mom to snap her fingers and forget everything about that time, no matter how much she cares about preserving the memory of her recently deceased husband. Reply 2. And I especially feel more in favor of OP than I might usually, because it's the only family picture up at all, and her husband died. It's traumatic to transition and not have the support of your parents, but it's also traumatic to have your spouse die young. Reply 3. It's even more traumatic to have a family demand that you did not grieve and mourn a devastating loss because of their feelings over something relatively petty. I went through that after the death of my son, and being told I wasn't allowed to grieve was almost worse than finding my baby dead in his crib. Response 4. I'm gonna say no a-holes here, but in a more gentle way. I'm trans FTM, and I know how painful it can be to see things like that, especially if Ben is trying to be stealthy in his day-to-day life. If he doesn't want anyone new that he meets, that he isn't intimate with dating, to know he's trans, something like that photo can ruin everything. That said, I'm still going with no a-holes here. If the photo is as off to the side as you say it is, it's fine that you have it up. It's a photo you want to keep up to remember your husband and your family together. My only suggestion, if you truly want to keep the peace, is to maybe have the photo digitally altered so the tattoo is removed. I'm not saying it's something you have to or should do. It's just a suggestion, if it's possible. Reply 1. My son is FTM, and we went through a little of this with my Facebook page. I rarely posted things, but friends and family who do use it regularly would often tag me in posts and mention him by his dead name before he changed it. I didn't think too much of it until I joined a mom's FB group for his sport. He freaked out because now I was outing him to everyone in that group who chose to look at earlier posts. I couldn't figure out a way to fix it except to delete my whole FB profile and start a new one. I felt so horrible about outing him, especially since we are in Florida, so that kind of thing is dangerous as well as just straight up painful for my son. As for pictures and videos, I have them all on my phone. Some have his dead name, like on birthday cakes, but he said he is okay with seeing or hearing his dead name on stuff from when he was younger. After that, it gets more painful. I've edited it out of any that bothers him. It took work, but I could see the pain on his face when he got blindsided with his dead name every once in a while. Anything I can do to make this easier on him, I'll do. Reply 2 trans guy here as well, seconding all of this. When I first came out, I felt very strongly about not wanting to see photos of myself pre-transition or for others to see them or any reference to my old name. For me personally, as I got further along in my transition, I became significantly more comfortable with all of it. No guarantee Ben's stance will soften though. and it's understandable. I think the digital alteration is a great idea, and/or moving the original photo into your bedroom, OP. Reply 3. Even if it were in the middle of the living room, or right when either of them walked in the door, it's the only picture that she still has of her deceased husband. She complied enough with her kid's request. There has to be a compromise somewhere, and the only reasonable one is therapy on the kid's part, if it hurts that much, and keeping the one picture she has left of her husband up. OP took everything else down already. Not the a-hole. Response 5. Not the a-hole. This is the kind of BS that makes older LGBT people roll their eyes. This kid has the most supportive parents ever by the standards of most of us who dealt with much, much worse from our families in the past. But a tattoo in a picture on their dead father that the father got, honoring them as a sign of affection for them, is some kind of terrible oppression. Ben needs to take a look around and realize how good he's got it if this is the biggest source of conflict his being transgender is causing within his family. Reply 1. Is there this prominent divide between the older LGBTQ set and the younger society? I ask because I have 2 friends, both in their 50s, both gay, who do a lot of "these kids these days" speeches about the community, and I always thought it was funny that they're the gay version of "get off my lawn." I assumed it was isolated to just them, but I've read a few comments like this on Reddit that make me wonder. Reply 2. I'm kind of in between, old millennial, and I think there's a similar generational divide there is with any group. Many of the people my age and older find it weird that so many young people identify as queer, despite not having any kind of outward presentation or dating history that would indicate they're anywhere on the LGBT spectrum. For many of us, it seems like you're actually a nice straight girl who is an ally to LGBT people. And yeah, I get the boomerness of saying your struggle is small compared to mine, but sometimes that's the case. The generation before me dealt with AIDS and families abandoning them while they died. So yes, my struggle with parents who say crappy things to me and didn't come to my wedding but still actually talk to me sometimes is less of a struggle. Perspective can be a good thing. Reply 3. I'm also a millennial queer and agree to a point with what you're saying, but I think there's a bit more nuance than that. Teenagers of all genders have a hard time understanding perspective because their brains haven't finished developing yet. Combine their natural impulsiveness with hormones and possibly some trauma if his parents weren't initially accepting of his transition, and I can see why it would feel a lot to be reminded of his dead name. And let's remember that it's only been 3 years since he transitioned until now. We don't know how long OP took to come around to it, but 3 years is a long time when you're only 19. He also lost his dad during that time, and it wasn't mentioned how long his dad took to come around or what their relationship was like when he died, so that's another layer of complexity. I also think comparing the generation's struggles isn't always the way to go. As a teenager, Ben is growing up where countries around the world are rolling back protections on trans rights. In the States, trans people and parents of trans kids are literally fleeing some states to avoid being arrested or to continue their transitions. Trans people are still murdered at higher rates than most of the population, especially BIPOC trans women. It's a scary time to be a trans person, let alone a trans teen who is still going through the fun of figuring out who they are as a person, outside their gender, and what they want to do with their life. Absolutely respect to the senior LGBTQ+ people who lived through the AIDS crisis and fought for the rights that are now being taken away. I wouldn't wish that trauma on anyone. But trauma comes in different forms, affects people differently, and people heal from it differently. So I wouldn't discount a trans teen's struggle or compare it with my own or yours, because we're in different stages of our lives and have had different experiences that give us perspective. I think us older queers need to have some more empathy for the younger queers, and I'm saying this as someone who doesn't really like kids or teens. Response 6. No a-holes here. Ben is still young enough that the memories of how it felt to be pre-transition are probably still really fresh, and it can feel hard to get away from that feeling of being trapped and helpless when there are still even trivial reminders lying around. Plus, If you've talked about this photo a lot together, it probably is starting to feel really outsized and hyper important to him. It's easy to not think about a picture that you hate if nobody in the family has mentioned it in ages and it's just the background noise of the house. But when it's become a pitched battlefield, it's harder to just work around. If you put it in a drawer for a year, until he's more secure in your support of him and feels like he's more distant from his pre-transition life, it'll do a whole world of good. But you're also not being the a-hole. If this is the only photo that you have of your husband, there's no photos of him with the tattoo covered or with you, but without Ben, it's also totally understandable that you'd want to display it. Reply 1. I think this is great as a reply, particularly if it took OP a considerable time to come around. It is a reminder of that time, and probably coupled with some big feelings about never knowing if his dad would have accepted him, which are some serious things to work through. I think getting it airbrushed or photoshopped out would be the cleanest. Reply 2. I don't think anyone is saying that she shouldn't mourn her husband. If nothing else, it probably also feels awful for the son that he has no pictures of his dad that don't also hurt to look at in other ways. Reply 3. The memories of losing her life partner are really fresh for OP. She's already removed everything else. It's insane that people think she should just not mourn her husband because her son wants to throw a selfish fit about his own baby picture tattooed on his dead father in a photo. Response 7. Older trans guy here. Not the a-hole. I understand what your son feels like when he sees his dead name. It irks me too when I see mine, which I find annoying because I swore I wouldn't care. But as you said, it's not even in a place where he's going to see it, unless he goes out of his way to. It is important for him that his identity is accepted, and it seems to be the case that even if you need a longer moment to come around, it happens. If you haven't already tried, maybe explain to him that it's not about his dead name, it's about his father and the memories you have together. If he can't see it, maybe with time and with his transition progressing, he'll be a little more open to conversation. I really feel like your son should let this one go. I'm really sorry about your husband. Reply 1. It feels like telling the OP that she didn't have 16 years of memories with Ben and his father before Ben's transition. It is great she supports Ben, but that is also 16 years of memories to have to ignore. Reply 2. I agree. Our past self is often a sensitive subject and hard to deal with, especially at the beginning of a transition. I understand the son, but considering all that OP said, especially the fact that it's not in the son's immediate vicinity, I feel there's a little room for understanding on the son's part. Reply 3. Yeah, I can't imagine how Ben feels or the emotions and difficulty of transitioning, but I can imagine as a parent if I had to completely forget, ignore, and suppress memories of my child and our family if he were to transition. I don't know if I could, and that would probably be a wedge, not the transitioning, but the idea I have to forget all the time we spent together as he grew up, because he presented as a different gender during that time. I hope I would be supportive if that ever happened, but I don't think I could just let go of everything too. Often Google shows me past photos and memories, and it makes me smile to think of what we were doing and how we all enjoyed ourselves as a family. I'm sure that would be as painful for the person who transitioned as it would be pleasant for the parents remembering their child. Response 8. Not the a-hole. Ben is being an a-hole even if unintentionally or softly. He had a life before this one, and you are his mother. I don't think it's fair for people to expect their loved ones to completely erase the person they loved first. The pic is in memory of his father, your husband who you lost. It's in a discreet place. His being very upset by this one remaining picture when you've otherwise chosen to grow and accept the change is selfish. I know the Kardashians get a lot of hate, plenty of it warranted, but I always found it very interesting how Caitlyn's transition was for many people the first glimpse into a family member transitioning. The depiction wasn't perfect by any means, but I was really touched by the scene where Kim brings Chris some of Bruce's old clothes. Chris is crying and expressing how she is struggling to grieve a person she loves who no longer exists. I'm not saying that's accurate, etc., etc., but it was genuine. It is absolutely something family members experience during a transition, and that doesn't make them unaccepting or hateful. You did lose a daughter to gain a son, and then you lost a husband. It makes complete sense that you cherish a photo of the three of you on a happy day. Ben needs to empathize and accept that the same way you worked to accept who he is now. Reply 1. I think the Caitlyn-Bruce Jenner thing is a great example of the complexity of the issue. It's important to respect how someone wants to be perceived and treated. At the same time, the past can't be erased. We can recognize that the man, Bruce Jenner, won the gold medal in the decathlon without diminishing the existence of Caitlyn Jenner as a woman. Response 9. No a-holes here. But if your relationship with Ben is important to you and you want it to flourish, consider getting the tattoo airbrushed out or digitally removed, or hanging the picture somewhere like in your bedroom or home office where it won't be seen by Ben and visitors. Otherwise, this could become a contentious issue. Think about if this really is the hill you're willing to die on. Response 10. Hot take. It's great you guys are getting along now, but I have no doubt your son will always have lingering doubts about your support, and whether this reconciliation is truly because you missed him or you just didn't want to be alone. I think there's more than the photo at play here. That being said, I was in your son's shoes around that age, in a very similar situation, and I absolutely hated anything of my previous life. It wasn't just an "I don't think this," it created real distress that I had trouble managing. I'm 10 years out as a brand new man, and am only getting comfortable revisiting the person I used to be. I would also suggest some family counseling, both together and separately. You are grieving two losses, one of your husband and one of your daughter, and your son, if he isn't already, could use some professional guidance on how to appropriately navigate his feelings. Reply 1. Oh, thank God for you. This is exactly what I was thinking, but I was swaying towards OP being the a-hole. This isn't about the picture alone. This may be a test to see if OP has really accepted the transition. Forgive me for assuming, but in my experience, when someone openly admits to being a little on one side, you can almost guarantee it was far more than a little. So when OP says that she was initially unsupportive, I automatically assume that there was a hell of a lot of hurtful words and actions at play. OP's son lost his father before completely transitioning, so there is also a lot of trauma tied up with all of this. His son obviously needs some therapy, OP too. It is a picture. He isn't asking her to destroy it. OP should put it in a drawer and take it out to look at it. If this means so much to her son, she needs to listen and try to understand. I would think that when OP's son is feeling secure in his relationship with his mother, he would be okay with the picture being back on display. At the end of the day, what is more important? A picture that she could still look at every day? Or her relationship with her son and enabling him to feel completely loved, heard, and supported? I don't believe that OP is trying to be an a-hole, and I do understand where she is coming from. I just think she probably needs to not die on this hill and risk her relationship with her son.